Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. These words, often attributed to Viktor Frankl, capture the most radical claim he ever made, not as philosophy, but as testimony. He had lived inside that space. He had found it in a place designed to abolish it entirely. Attitude values are the third and, Frankl believed, the most profound of the three pathways to meaning he identified. The first two are more intuitive, creative values, meaning found through what we give to the world through our work and actions, and experimental values, meaning found through what we receive from the world through beauty, love, and encounter. But attitude values stand apart. They do not require favorable conditions. They do not require health, freedom, opportunity, or even hope. They require only the one thing that cannot be confiscated, the inner decision about how to face what cannot be changed. Frankl arrived at this concept through observation, not theory. In the camps, he watched men and women stripped of every external marker of humanity, their names, their professions, their families, their possessions, and he noticed that something essential persisted. Not in everyone, and not always, but with enough consistency to constitute a pattern. Those who retained a sense of meaning in their suffering, who could find something to stand for even in degradation, retained a dignity that the machinery of dehumanization could not fully reach. And conversely, those who lost that interior stance, who surrendered not just to the conditions but to the belief that the conditions defined them completely, deteriorated in ways that went beyond the merely physical. He articulated this with a clarity that only someone who had tested it under extremity could achieve. The last of the human freedoms, he wrote, is the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. This is not optimism in the shallow sense. It is not the injunction to smile through agony. It is the recognition that even in agony, the human being retains authorship over the most important story being told, the story of who they are in relation to what is happening to them. In clinical practice, Frankl applied this concept with great care. He was careful not to impose it. To suggest to a suffering person that they simply choose a better attitude would be both insulting and therapeutically useless. Instead, he worked to help patients discover, from within their own experience, the moments when they had already exercised this freedom without knowing it. A woman caring for a severely ill husband who described her own suffering as the price of love was already practicing attitude values. A man who had lost his career to illness but found in his forced retirement the space to reconnect with his family was already living this principle. Frankl's task was simply to name what they were doing, to make the unconscious exercise of freedom conscious, so it could be sustained. The relevance today goes beyond individual crisis. Consider the epidemic of what psychologists call learned helplessness, the state in which people have come to believe that their circumstances fully determine their experience, and that there is nothing meaningful they can do in response to adversity except wait for the conditions to change. Social media contributes to this by presenting curated images of lives apparently free from difficulty, making ordinary suffering feel like personal failure. The therapy industry, despite its best intentions, sometimes reinforces the idea that well-being is a product of the right techniques and conditions rather than a capacity that can be exercised in any conditions. Frankl's attitude values cut through this confusion. They do not deny that some situations are genuinely terrible, that systemic injustice causes real harm, or that people need practical help. But they insist on a truth that comfort culture systematically suppresses, that within whatever situation a person faces, there remains a dimension of freedom that circumstances cannot touch. And in that dimension, human dignity is not merely preserved, it is expressed at its most powerful. There is a clinical case Frankl described of an elderly general practitioner who came to him 2 years after the death of his wife, consumed by grief so deep it had become incapacitating. Frankl did not try to relieve the grief. Instead, he asked a question: what would have happened if you had died first, and she had to survive you? The man immediately grasped that his wife had been spared this suffering, and that his own suffering was the price of that sparing. His grief had not changed, but his attitude toward it shifted entirely. He left the office a different man, not a healed man, but a man who had reclaimed authorship over the meaning of his pain. This is the gift of attitude values. Not the removal of suffering, but its transformation. Not the abolition of difficulty, but the discovery that within difficulty, the human spirit has resources it did not know it possessed, and that the exercise of those resources is, in itself, a form of meaning that nothing and no one can take away. Subscribe to the Psychology of Viktor Frankl to explore more of his timeless ideas.